thank you so much for the introduction. That was really lovely. And thank you, Kevin, Pat and Kai, for being here today. So as per the introduction, today we're going to cover the sometimes thorny topic of how to get stakeholder buy-in when you're building better products. And the four of us got together to discuss this session ahead of time. And the first sentence of the abstract really, really caught our attention. It was, the biggest myth about getting buy-in from a stakeholder is that you need data and logic to make your case. And Pat, you were on it out the gate with this. Like, let's start there. Do you agree with that statement?
No, of course not. It's not a myth. I mean, at least it doesn't resonate with my own experience. So my own experience is pretty much the opposite. So when I was trying to influence by presenting use cases, user stories, and all the empathy that we do in design, and, you know, this is my fantastic persona, this is what I know about the user journey, that was not really working. When it started working for me, it was when I combined the empathy, the understanding of the user problem, the understanding of what is happening in the user experience, with a quantifiable measurement that actually would resonate way better with my PMs. So the moment that I started pointing out and looking at user behaviors through product analytics, I was able to combine what was happening in the user experience and all the narrative that you hear from users when you test, together with, hey, and this is happening. We have an increase in, I don't know, failure rate or a drop-off rate or whatever rate it is, or a decrease in engagement. So this is how you can make better decisions. And this is how I was able to kind of push changes and nudges. So for me, data has been my best friend. And truly, for me, it's the way that I can show the value of changing and doing things.
Kevin, do you agree with that? 'Cause, like, I think you've had a slightly different experience, haven't you?
Yeah, I think I had a different experience, and maybe it's the life cycle of the companies I was in, or maybe life cycle of products. But certainly earlier on, I found that the narrative, you know, almost the artistic side of it, and again, you think with UX, Pat, that would be stronger there, but I found more the narrative, kind of what the story is behind it, the more qualitative feedback, the kind of couple of quotes you could get from some key people were quite important. And also, you know, when you're in engineering and you're maybe dealing with non-technical founders, going out and, you know, they don't necessarily understand what technology can bring to a product or a space. And you can talk about it all day with the meetings, but actually coming back with something built, a prototype, something that can click, again, for me, has been hugely powerful in getting buy-in and kind of saying, okay, we see it now, we get what you're talking about. Now, maybe I'm just bad at explaining, but sometimes getting something you can say, and this is real data, this is not mock data, this is not clickable data, this is something real. To me, I've seen that have a powerful effect on stakeholders as well, given that this is the target we're talking about here. Sometimes they might not understand from an engineering perspective what can be done, what's possible, what's not possible. So often, not just having something they can click, something tangible they can feel, and also a story built around it, saying, well, we can bring this further in this direction, and getting them then to steer the direction can be quite powerful as well.
That's really interesting. So I've always come at this from like a product and founder point of view. So selfishly, I was excited to talk to you all to hear like a different angle for this. And like Kai, you're in engineering as well. Where do you go first if you want to get stakeholder buy-in? Do you go to data? Do you do something different? Yeah, what do you do?
So data, I agree, data is very, very important. And for me, another aspect that is very, very important is transparency, to share the data, to be very open with the stakeholders, with everyone, to get their buy-in. So, and data is a wonderful tool for creating this transparency, because the truth is in the data.
Sometimes, although people argue about that, don't they? It can say, you know, it depends what spin you put on it, I find sometimes.
I think like it can be abused is maybe a strong word, but maybe again you're dealing with people, you know, data can be overwhelming. It can be hard for people to say, well, what what are we going for here? Yeah, that metrics looks good, but how is that arrived at? And it can sometimes derail discussions as well. If you don't have someone who's presenting the data who, maybe again, that goes back to the narrative that the data should support a narrative that people kind of go, okay, I get the context of this data. I get the point, I get where this person wants to bring this discussion,
Yeah,
I agree. I agree with you. So that data, of course, can be overwhelming, and that it needs a bit of guidance to go through the data together. Sorry, Pat.
No, absolutely. But I was saying, I agree with all you're saying. Context is everything, and data is not a single point in history or in the journey. It's constant. So you don't need one single data. You need to see the evolution and how data tells a story. So it's both the story of the data and how that story crafts and influences what's happening on the other side, on the user side. So it's kind of keeping an eye on what are the changes and the variables. So data by itself doesn't tell me, a 5% increase in engagement. It's not a story if I don't create the correlation and I'm able to create a hypothesis and go to my stakeholder and say, you know what, we did this and it had this impact. Last month, we did that and it had that impact. So should we try something new and see what is the effect? And, a very experiment-driven mentality supported with data really helps to have interesting conversation and influence the product development, or at least my case.
Sorry, after you, Kevin. After you.
Just a short example. Recently, I had a good data point. It was around a key result of an objective. I was like, yes, this is good proof of what we're doing is right. And I went to a stakeholder and I said, look, we need more investment in this area. And the response I got was, no, that metric's not important. Yet we had agreed on that metric. So, and I think this is down to the abstract for this talk. It's, data and logic. And sometimes you might have data and then the logic changes, or you have a different understanding of the logic.
Because we're dealing with people at the end of the day, and all different stakeholders, different personalities. Some really cling to the story and the narrative. Some just want to see numbers. Like Kai, how do you deal with all the different personalities you have to as a director of engineering? Because you're really at the intersection of lots of different people and departments. Have you got any good tips?
Yeah, that's right. That we have lots of different stakeholders that we have to get on board, and that we have to somehow align. And that's why, getting back to what I said before, transparency is so important to me. Because when we have different stakeholders for a single one team, then we have to prioritize, and the stakeholders have to do it. And therefore, it is very important to bring them all onto the same page. And we are doing this with a roundtable format, where we present our roadmaps, where we present what we have achieved and what we have not achieved, so that all the data points are transparent to the stakeholders, and then that we then can take decisions together.
That's really cool, getting that alignment up front. I definitely think that helps. But like Kevin, back to your point a second ago, what did you do? Because that happens a lot. People change their mind. What did you do when you'd agreed something and then you felt like it wasn't agreed again? Like, how did you handle that conversation?
Took a deep breath. First of all. I guess you have no choice, but then you understand, okay, what's the new data point, or and maybe try to dig, why is this new narrative or new thing coming up? And you're kind of trying to go, okay, you go back and you try and interpret it and say, okay, I've misunderstood something, or maybe something has changed and I'm not aware of. And again, you try to build that understanding back up again. Again, I guess if you believe in what you're trying to achieve through the stakeholder, there's no point in fighting it. You can obviously acknowledge, hey, we've hit this was agreed. Okay, it's changed. Let me have a look at this. So yeah, kind of went back, not to the drawing board, but kind of went back to kind of, okay, where is this now going to? And how do I somehow draw a dotted line from where we are to this new place and try and follow it then?
That's really cool. And we've had a question from the audience, but before I ask that, can you share your experience as well, Pat? Like, have you had a difficult situation you've had
Always.
to go back to?
I mean, it's always difficult when you want to influence because you want to change someone's opinion or someone's starting point. So it's all about knowing how you can be everyone's best ally and what is everyone's explicit or implicit agenda. So if you're talking to engineers, what are the KPIs, OKRs, metrics that matter to them? So how can that decision that we are trying to push and we see coming from data help them to look good and help them to be successful? So it's kind of more subtle and perhaps some basic social engineering in how can I serve you and how can this narrative be a narrative that for the PM or the engineer or the marketeers that is interested in changing can help their narrative. So always building the stories around your audience so that your story can be their stories and they can click in, and it's kind of capitalizing on empathy in a way.
Yeah, that's definitely a key point from my experience as well. It's understanding what each stakeholder needs, how they like to be worked with, what you can do to support them. And I'm so sorry, my phone rang in the middle of that, Pat. I think it was one of my children. They obviously don't know I'm still at work today, so apologies for that. I was listening.
No worries. It's live. It works.
It's live. This is proof that it's live, right? So we've got some really nice questions coming in. The first one is, have you ever experienced people where data doesn't work? I don't know who wants to start with this. Has anyone dealt with a stakeholder where they just like don't care about the data, it's all about their opinion?
The thing is, every metric and every way that matters, business language is filled with data. So they may not understand some and certain types of data. You just have to find which is the data that makes them click. So in my role is pretty much to show the business value of design and create efficiencies. So what resonates with my finance partner, hey, we save 30% of data of budget, doesn't necessarily resonate with others. But if I tell them we save 20% of time and increase productivity, that resonates. So not everything works for everyone, but finding the right data. So it's kind of what we were discussing. It's a story because you can have your own opinion, but not your own data.
Love it. And there's a nice one, Quinn. I'm going to start with you, Kevin, on this one. Because I think you've felt the situation. Like, what if you're like at the beginning, you're in a startup, a smaller business, and you've only got data from a few customers? Do you trust it, or do you wait until you've got more? What do you do in that situation?
It is very difficult and something I struggle with in terms of data. When you're starting off, and it could be a greenfield, new part of the product, or it could be a new product in itself. I find everyone wants to look for that metric, everyone wants that key insight, and they're just not statistically reliable. So often I just don't even fight it anymore. I just kind of go with more qualitative feedback, go with those powerful kind of case studies. If we can get one or two of those, again, you don't have access to maybe to hundreds or thousands of users. So you kind of have to go back to that pilot phase where you're like, yeah, if I can convince 5 people and if I can get their feedback, that's enough. Because you can beat yourself up all day looking for the perfect metric, and it just doesn't, at that stage of a product, it just doesn't exist.
Yeah, great point. Kai, what stages of data have you had to deal with? Have you like been involved in a startup where you've had very little data, or have you ever had the opposite problem and had too much?
I think both, because when we are launching our games, we have different phases. So we start internally with internal user tests and reaching out to some more users, but still very much hidden. And then the next stage would be that we go into a small market. And so constantly increasing the number of users where we can get feedback and data from, so that we are not overwhelmed, but that we have always a significant amount of people providing us with this data, so that we know that it's worth looking at it.
Cool. And Pat or Kevin, I don't know who wants to take this one first. Have you ever had too much data? Have you ever been in that situation where the data's been like overwhelming? I'm kind of in my head, the angle for me is like customer feedback, like especially when you've launched a new product, that can be like very noisy. Have either of you had experience with that? I don't know. Do you want to start, Pat?
If you have too much data, it means that you don't know what you are asking and looking for, because having too much data means you don't understand the data, or you are not collecting it in the right way. You are asking the wrong questions. So you are generating too much data without making use of it. So if we're talking large amount of quantitative or qualitative data, if they are wrong, they're too much. So I don't think too much is a problem. The problem here is the quality of it and not the quantity. And for me, that's critical, because even if I have 1,000 quotes from a survey, I should have the capacity to analyze it. Otherwise, why did I collect so many? So there's either something wrong in the process of the data collection, or in how I designed the experience, or how basically I thought about the question. So not really, because I try to be mindful of the time of the team and what we need, and be focused. So,
and Kevin, I guess same question to you. Have you ever been in a situation where you've got this data flying at you and you're like, oh, help?
Yeah, but I'd agree with Pat. I think where it gets overwhelming is if you didn't know what you're asking in the first place. You know, you haven't spent the time up front to say, what's this experiment? What are we looking to learn here? You know, if you rush into a feature or something, you're like, yeah, let's do it, and we get feedback, and no one's like, what are we actually looking to learn? Then it can get very noisy, because, you know, surveys, a lot of it is very noisy. It's not exactly where you want it to be. So you really need to be thorough and kind of focused on, this is actually what we're looking to learn here, and discard the noisier pieces.
Got it. And
I think and just looking at this, regardless of whether it's data or whether it's more qualitative or more narrative based, I think the one common thing is, and this is just from Pat was saying, any approach takes a lot of time and effort. Like, that's the thing that it never surprised me how long it takes to prepare a good case in terms of understanding stakeholders, preparing your data, getting your case study or your proof of concept together. It takes so much time and preparation, and working in engineering, there's ideas everywhere. And people think, oh, I should just be able to say it to one person and it should be a thing. And then they get annoyed if, the stakeholder doesn't listen. I'm like, no, this takes weeks and months of shaping and putting your case together. And I think regardless of whether it's data or narrative, putting the time in there will ultimately get you to buy in. It's that lack of time and preparation, which means you won't be successful if you don't do that work.
Yeah, that's a really good point that I don't think many people talk about. And that's definitely the second takeaway from you all, really, is like, first one being think about data, but think about the story and the audience, and then think about how, it's effort, isn't it? It takes a lot of energy. So Kai, when you're doing these like roundtables that you mentioned, is that a lot of effort for you? Is it the same group of people? Could you tell us a little bit more about that process?
So we have streamlined the effort. So I'm running these format for 8 different teams. And as we have streamlined the format, it is not that much of effort. And we have different groups of stakeholders. Sometimes they are overlapping, but we are reaching out to different stakeholders. And due to the fact that we have templates for these roundtables, and that even those of our stakeholders who are present in more than one roundtable, they find their way through it, and they are used to the format. So I think it was quite a big effort to launching these formats, but now it's more a maintaining job.
That's interesting. So it's like a muscle the business has to build almost. You've got to see the value in that alignment and put processes and things in place to, like you were describing, like make it easier, I guess, as you do more of them. We've had another question in, which is a really interesting one. I'm going to start with you again, Pat. Do you have any advice if you're looking for stakeholder buy-in just to get the data? So have you ever had a situation where you need something and someone's just not playing ball?
I just do it. And then, so, you know, the beauty of data is that it's contextual and you can always create your data, which means we have the traditional metrics, whatever they are. But sometimes you just need to do a very rapid experiment and create some in-context measurements. So I just run and be creative and invent something. I mean, sometimes you don't need precise data, as long as the data is directional and kind of gives you enough confidence in saying this is what is happening. That's good enough. You can always refine, but it's if you don't have data, make it up, which doesn't mean invent that 1 million customers said we love you, but just find a very rapid lean experiment to run with it, do it even for 1 hour and just share that this is directional. Hey, if we try something more, we can learn something more and we can do better and we can iterate and we can grow. And it's just the starting point, but it always helped for me. So make your data.
And Kevin, have you ever experienced anything similar? Have you ever had a situation where you found it difficult to even get people to be, you know, part of the discussion?
Yeah, and I'd fall back on other, like the narrative approach or the kind of proof of concept approach. And luckily, being an engineer, you can typically, as Pat said, you can cobble something together, you can do something to get more buy-in. But also, as Pat said, you can use another metric. If you can, like you say, you can be creative. You might find another proxy metric like that. You don't have access to 100,000 users. You might find some other proxy that gives you an indication. It's not perfect, but it might be something to go back with that's cheaper to get, or that you have, it's within your power to get. That again, you might make the case then to say, okay, we should put this out to a wider group and get the data that you actually want. So I think, you know, typically day-to-day, we use proxy metrics a lot. Everyone wants to move the needle revenue, and that's extremely difficult to do, and that takes a long time. So you're constantly trying to say, well, what would work in place of that? You know, if you know, this is the ideal metric, but what can we do? What's within our power to make our case?
Really cool. And Kai, the last few minutes, I thought it'd be good to talk about like, how do you actually document any of this? So you've had the roundtable, transparency is important, you want to get everyone aligned. Do you like document it in Confluence? Do you have like a spreadsheet? How do you make sure there's like a trail, I guess, of like decisions that are made?
That's a good point. So we are documenting each of these roundtables in Confluence, exactly where we are taking the notes, where we are writing down the action points, so that we are tagging all users being present and those of them who should be present but couldn't make it, so that the stakeholders get notified by the inbuilt notification function in Confluence. So yeah, that's a good point.
Cool. And that helps build transparency, right? If you're doing that ongoing and tagging people and sharing, you've got that trail, I guess. Do you do something different, Pat? How do you kind of document decisions and that sort of thing?
It's, I mean, I'm pretty much the same, but what I really try to do is to connect decisions with impact and stakeholders and who is accountable. So I kind of have some bases where I have the company OKR metrics, goals, whatever we call them, and what are the success metrics, what are the team projects and initiative, what is success for them, who is accountable for what, and tracking how things are happening, all the decisions that are being taken, and clarifying if anything goes wrong, who was accountable for. Because the biggest problem is you start with quarterly priorities, and suddenly, after 6 weeks into the quarter, someone comes and say, oh, you know, priority that was super important, super hot, super urgent, drop it. And you just find that you wasted 6 weeks worth of work for 3 resources. And you start doing the math on how much I'm wasting. Again, data. So, hey, 6 resources for the 6 weeks, how much time, how much money, who is accountable for? So who took the decision to change priorities? And yes, I'm probably more focused on impact and accountability of decisions, but yeah, give me a base, give me OKRs, and I'll track everything.
Very cool. And what about you, Kevin?
Yeah, I'm kind of happy with OKRs. Try not to go to too much detail in terms of tracking every decision. It's like if the outcome is hit, that's okay. And if it's not, do your review at the end of a quarter or whatever and see where the team went astray. Maybe to your point, Pat, maybe something came in the middle of the quarter that they had to switch from. But no, I'm typically happy at kind of that quarterly cadence. And again, focusing on the outcome, focusing on hopefully a measurable result, be that a really small sample one or, where you've accessed a lot of people. It doesn't matter once there's something there that people are aligned around.
Cool. We've got 5 minutes and one more question. Hooray. So what was the best example of air cover, so support from C-level people you've ever gotten? So Kai, have you ever had a situation where you've needed to align a stakeholder and someone in the C-suite has like saved the day or really been on your side? Have you got any kind of good examples of that?
Usually the C-level people are also invited into these roundtables. So this is very important, I think, to have this approach to jointly come to a decision through all hierarchy levels. So and yeah, from time to time, of course, it happens, especially when things from outside coming in, Facebook, Apple changing their APIs, that it's pretty obvious that we have to do something. But coming back to the cadences, for example, that's why we have decided to have only a 4 weeks cadence, to be very flexible, to react very agile to all these needs. Because I agree with Pat, it is a drama when you have to throw away 6 weeks of work or so.
It is an absolute drama, yes. 100%. Pat, have you got any examples where you've had to like bring in the C-suite, or are you similar to Kai in that the process includes them anyway?
Well, in a way, my role itself, managing design operations means that I'm an enabler and I empower team leaders and everyone to do things. So I always describe my role as a brilliant number 2. Brilliant because it's always nice to say. But jokes apart, it's about making sure that I have the relationship and I'm their ally and I'm their servant enablers that help. So for me, those relationships are critical and are part of my role, because without C-level buy-in and without getting their support and without being able to speak their language, because it's always about speaking their language, I'm useless.
Perfect. And do you have a similar relationship to Kai and Pat, Kevin, with your team?
Just thinking back to the question, or an example just came into my head of a previous team I worked on, and we stumbled across something, that technology enabled. We were working on a particular solution for a particular part, and we were like, oh no, there's something here. And this is back to the illogical or the logical part of the abstract. Logically, from engineering management, which I wasn't in at the time, we were locked into quarterly things. It didn't make sense to go down this road. But I guess having other stakeholders align and having kind of your network in your organization, kind of having a side channel to the CEO and kind of presenting. And what we stumbled upon was very close to his vision. So often in engineering management, you can be kind of locked into this process, but actually going to him and presenting a narrative and showing, this could accelerate the vision. It might take 3 years for your vision, but this could be a key foundational piece of it. That then helped get buy-in with the middle layers.
Yeah.
So it wasn't very logical from engineering management point of view, but it really tied to where the company wanted to go, if you like. So maybe it was a bit bold to do that, but it worked.
Oh, I love it. They were brilliant examples. So we've only got a minute left, which I'm sad about. That went far too fast, but thank you all so much. That was really, really good session. And I think the key takeaways from listening to all this is think about data and storytelling and combining those. The stakeholders, it's all different personalities, different people. So just being like mindful of how to communicate them and what they need is really useful. People are hard work, right, Kevin? It takes a lot of time to get stakeholder
and patience, deep breathing. And yeah, that's a really good point. And then finally, as Kai was explained so nicely, transparency and process can go a really, really long way in getting the buy-in you need to build great products. So yeah, thank you all. This has been brilliant.